the 36-foot motor lifeboat. Right behind me is a 36503, the 36-foot motor lifeboat, 10¼ tons. It was one of the first lifeboats used in the Coast Guard when they put sails on them, and then they went to engines, and they went to a gas engine. Usually they had the Sterling Viking gas engines in them that were kind of cantankerous, and a lot of the old sailors, when they would run the boat, but when they had to cross through the surf, they would shut the engine off and still use the old sail that they had on board. And then they started putting the diesel engines in them, and usually you put little 4-cylinder Jimmy diesels in, and a few of them had straight 6-cylinder Buddha diesels. This had the 6-cylinder straight Buddha diesel in it, and the boat could do 9.5, maybe 10 knots just in good water. Going into the sea, it was always slowed down to about 7.5, 8 knots if you're going into the sea, into the wind. Forward here is the forecastle, and they got the name forecastle from the old ancient days when they built their warships, and they had, most of the battles were done from castles, and they put 2 castles on the ships, 2 big framing woodwork structures on them. One was forward, so it was called the forward castle, and which they got the name, and later on they put people up on board there, and it was called the forecastle. Forward here you can see a little scupper, the black hole down below. That's to the cockpit, or what we called the glory hole, that you could stand in. And if it filled up full of water, of course, the water would drain out through the scuppers. After the forecastle was the well deck, and the forward well deck, and underneath that was the fuel tanks, and it had scuppers in it. So if it filled up full of water, the water could run out. Then there was the engine room, which is about 8 feet down, and it had it was covered, so the engine was covered there, and you could get into the engine room. It was pretty tight, but sometimes it was the only warmth you had. If you got freezing cold, you could get in the engine room, and it was really hot, but most of the people that would get into the engine room would get seasick anyway because of the diesel smells. Then you had the after deck, the after well deck, and that's where you ran the boat from, and the crew would stand there, and you had scuppers there, and you stood on a 4-inch platform. That was a beautifully wooden platform, and that would keep your feet off the main deck, but the water running through the scuppers would splash up through it, and in time your feet would get soaking wet standing on the platform. After that was a little compartment called the lazarette, the most after compartment in the ship, and that's where the emergency steering was, and you'd stood at the wheel, and there were some handrails there for the crew to hang on to. Underway in the 36-footer was very wet. You had the spray shield up forward that would deflect some of the solid water coming on over, but the spray and the waves breaking over the bow and coming down and hitting on top of the engine room would flood you down with water, and you would get soaking wet, and you would be extremely cold. In the old days, we didn't have much foul weather gear. We had one foul weather jacket that was kind of a green canvas on the outside, and it was a nice jacket. The only trouble is after a few hours it would soak through, and then you would get very, very cold. We wore the dungaree pants, just cotton pants, and so you really got hypothermia. Nobody knew what hypothermia was in those days. You just got damn cold was all. And so you'd stand at the wheel and hang on, and the crew would hang on to the life rails, and hour after hour with the water pouring over you, your lips could crack open from the salt and the spray, and the only time the blood would get washed away, the next swell would come on over, and it wasn't a very nice trip. Up forward in the forecastle was the survival gear, and we had 16 life jackets up there, the fire axe, fire extinguishers, and the food, in case we got stuck out overnight or all day long. And the food consisted of one big block of cheese that didn't get cared for very often, so it was always green with mold. We had a water brinker that was about 18 inches long and maybe 10 inches high, beautiful wooden little barrel that would carry 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons of water, but we never changed the water very often, so when you did want to get a drink, and that was the only thing you had, so you'd drink the old stale water out of there and then say, I'm going to change that next time. So the cruise on the 36-footer was usually a miserable ride, but people would fight for the chance to go out on it and go out on the next call. So what I did, I combined everything together, and I wrote this poem about the 36-footer. Here's to the crews that went out on the lifeboats. They had little protection, only light weather coats. A 36-footer wooden open lifeboat weighing 10 tons when it was afloat. Only a spray shield to deflect the wind and the spray as you stood on a raised platform each time underway. The platform would keep your feet a few inches off the deck, but the water coming through the scupper still got your feet wet. The coxswain had the helm, the wheel he held tight. The crew clung to the handrails with all their might. The boat would rise up on an oncoming swell, then drop off the backside as you were weightless as you fell. Your lips would crack from the sun and the spray, and you could taste the blood before it was washed away. Then your boat took a roll, and the sea water rushed in, over the platform again and again. Your eyes were straining for a distress vessel to be found, but only waves white with foam could be found. Your shoes that were made to keep your feet dry, but started to leak as time goes by. With your feet soaking wet, your lips are cracked, and the kindling salt spray starts running down your back. Through the pits and the road, the salt and the sea, you found your quarry that needed you so desperately. The cruise passed the tow line with a vigorous soul, and you headed for home with the fishing vessel in tow. You have following seas and the wind at your backside, so going home would be a much better ride. You're still wet and cold, and you have to go pee. What do you do in a 36-footer at sea? Your hands are too cold to do nothing but hold the wheel, so you just let it go, the warmth you can feel. You are already wet, it doesn't much matter, and you feel better with an empty bladder. There's another factor the crews must lick. It's the dreaded agony of being seasick. Your head is pounding and you have a pain in your gut, and then you gag and start to throw up. With the weather being wicked and the seasick too, and you're out to sea, there is little you can do. So this is just one call and what happens underway, and for a few occasions that can happen each day. I thank you.